Welcome to the Electra-Med Edge, where we explore the science, technology, and innovations advancing human performance and patient care through precision measurement. I'm Andy, Clinical Sales Manager at Electra-Med, and I'm excited to have you join us as we launch this new series. Electra-Med is proud to be a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business founded in 1975 as a biomedical service organization. Nearly 5 decades later, our mission remains the same: to deliver not only cutting-edge equipment and supplies, but also the support of the sale, meaning we're here for our customers long after installation and training. Today, Electra-Med provides full-service solutions across neurology, cardiology, physical medicine and rehabilitation, sleep diagnostics, respiratory care, and U.S. government contracts, serving clinicians, researchers, academics, and performance professionals nationwide. Through Electra-Med Edge, we'll bring you conversations with experts, insights into emerging technologies, and real-world applications from across these fields, all aimed at advancing human performance and clinical precision. Let's get started. Welcome to the Electra-Med Edge, the podcast where we explore the technology, science, and real-world application advancing human performance and clinical precision. I'm your host, Andy, Clinical Sales Manager with Electra-Med. And there was no better way to start this podcast series than with the people who are truly on the front lines of health and performance. If you're going to launch a show focused on real-world impact, why not begin with the professionals supporting those who protect and serve every day? In today's episode, we're joined by Frontline Mobile Health, an organization dedicated to delivering comprehensive physicals for first responders, including fire, police, and EMS, through a full health screening process. Their approach integrates resting vitals, hearing and vision testing, X-ray, cardiopulmonary exercise testing, ultrasound, and in-person medical provider visits, all designed to meet the unique demands of tactical athletic populations. Our guest today is Conner Benson, exercise physiologist and certified strength and conditioning specialist. In his role, Conner administers and interprets CPETs for the first responders, physicals, trains and mentors new exercise physiologists, and has recently begun contributing to ongoing research efforts. An exciting step forward in a field where many important CPET questions still remain unanswered. This conversation dives into what it takes to bring high-quality physiological testing directly to the front lines, and how objective data can help improve readiness, safety, and long-term outcomes for first responders. Andy, host of the Electra-Med Edge podcast. The Electra-Med Edge is brought to you by Electra-Med Corporation, founded in 1975 as a medical device service company. Today we have with us Conner Benson. Conner is the exercise physiologist with Frontline Mobile Health. Conner is an exercise physiologist who one of his primary duties involves administrating and interpreting CPETs for first responders physicals. He also guides and trains newer exercise physiologists that are new to the team. Most recently, he's been invited to participate in groundbreaking research efforts to help understand a little bit more of what's going on during the CPET. So, Conner, welcome. Thanks for joining us here on the Electra-Med Edge.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andy. Glad to be here.
Yeah, excellent. So tell our guests and everybody, who is Frontline? What all do you do?
Yeah, so Frontline, the full name is Frontline Mobile Health, and we essentially do health screening for first responders. So that's firefighters, police officers, and EMS, emergency medical services. And we have a really holistic, comprehensive health screening or physical process where essentially we put them through vitals, which like just resting blood pressure, resting heart rate, hearing and vision assessments, and then a cardiopulmonary exercise test or CPET, which is my role as an exercise physiologist. And they also go through ultrasound and X-ray for cancer screening, just those two radiology screenings. And then they have a provider visit on top of that to go over all of their results, which, by the way, before they do all of that, they also do blood draws. So we look at their labs as well. So it's a very comprehensive physical. And the reason Frontline was started is because there was kind of a gap, right? There was a gap where first responders were not receiving the physicals that we believed they deserved. A lot of times they would just get some blood work done and go to their primary care physician, and they were cleared physically to do their job. But as we know, first responders have very intensive jobs physically. They have very stressful jobs, and a lot of times it impacts their health in very serious ways. So that's kind of where Frontline comes from. We noticed that gap in the healthcare system and in first responders treatments and care. So that's how it comes about. And we've had the privilege of serving tens of thousands of patients this past year, and we're planning to grow even more and see even more first responders and make sure they're staying as healthy as possible.
That's awesome. And if I understand you also correctly, is you actually take it to them, right? So you show up at their stations or wherever. So is that my understanding?
That's absolutely true. Yep. So Frontline Mobile Health, that's where the name comes from. There are some, as we grow, there are some locations that we have that are just like standalone offices, and the first responders will come to us. We also do new hires in office. So for example, I'm here in our Georgetown office in Central Texas, and we have a lot of new hires that come through here, as well as the Georgetown Fire Department and police departments. So there are some of those standalone clinic locations, but for the most part, we are a mobile company, and we actually take our equipment to the station, the police station or the fire station, and we do their physicals right there.
Awesome. No, that's great. I think that helps alleviate a lot of the burden in getting them into better health screenings and everything like that. So that's awesome. So maybe you could help talk a little bit about what's some of the equipment that you all use to help facilitate some of this testing?
Yeah. So I'm a little less familiar with the other screening equipment that we use. I know some general information, but I'll talk first about my equipment, which is the CPET or cardiopulmonary exercise test equipment. So we use a cycle ergometer. Lode Corival is the bike model that we use. It's a stationary bike essentially, and that is directly connected to what's called a metabolic cart, which is a big machine that is mobile as well, but it's essentially, it has oxygen and CO2 analyzer in there, very high-tech equipment that allows us to do cardiopulmonary exercise testing, or some people might be more familiar with VO2 max testing. That's kind of the exercise component of what we test, is the VO2 max of these first responders. And so those are the two main pieces of equipment that we use for CPET. Importantly, one of the distinguishing factors of CPET is that we hook the first responder up to an EKG, a 12-lead EKG. So it's not just the traditional gas analysis, it's also a comprehensive cardiovascular profiling that we're doing, and assessing the electrical conduction system in their heart, estimating cardiac output, making sure it's all progressing linearly relative to the exercise demand. So those are the main pieces of equipment. We also take their blood pressure throughout the test, so blood pressure, cuff, all that standard stuff. And a pulse oximeter if need be. So that's the cardiopulmonary exercise test equipment. We also have x-rays and, like I said, and ultrasound machines that we bring to the fire station or police station, and hearing and vision equipment. So those are the main bread and butter pieces of our mobile equipment. So it's actually pretty concise, but it allows us to do a lot of different things.
That's awesome. So yeah, really, you're diving or really getting into some real world applications with that, especially within the CPET. So we've mentioned CPET a few times. Can you maybe help explain what the CPET is for people that aren't familiar?
Yeah. So what's nice about CPET and the name is cardiopulmonary exercise test. You can kind of get what it's saying from that name. So cardiopulmonary is the main meat and potatoes of the CPET. So it's a cardiovascular exercise test, but it's also looking at pulmonary function, because we do pulmonary function tests before the exercise test, before the VO2 max test. And VO2 max is very closely related with cardiac output, or in other words, how much blood your heart is pumping per minute. So essentially, it's heart rate times stroke volume of the heart is cardiac output, and VO2 is directly correlated with that in a healthy person, at least. And so what we do is an incremental CPET. There are different types of CPETs. This one is an incremental CPET, or an incremental VO2 max test, which means that it's a linear progression in work rate throughout the entire test. And because of that, your heart will always respond to that external demand, and will attempt to do so in a linear fashion. So since the workload's increasing linearly, if we see any kind of deviation in the physiological patterns and it's not linear, then we can start to assess what are the abnormalities there? Like, what is this person's relative dysfunction or disease state looking like? So that's kind of where CPET separates itself from some traditional stress tests and VO2 max tests, is we're trying to assess trend lines relative to an expected linear pattern. A lot of times it's not linear, and that's where we can start to understand dysfunction in a patient. So essentially, the patient pedals to max effort. So they pedal until their legs reach fatigue. So what increases during the test is the actual workload in a linear fashion, like I said. And the patient's literally just keeping their RPMs, their revolutions per minute on the bike the same the entire time, usually around 65 to 75 revolutions per minute. And they just maintain that as long as they possibly can. Usually it's about 10 to 12 minutes by the time someone fatigues. And that's where they reach their VO2 peak, we call it.
Sure. No, great. All great points. So let's dive a little bit into, so you're using this equipment, you're using these testing methodologies, and are you looking at how the job demands are impacted by this type of fitness, or are you using the methods to help better their functional fitness for their job demands?
Yeah, we are absolutely applying it to their job demands. There's two important points I would make. The first one is that we always tell these first responders, hey, look, this test, this CPET, is not trying to say that you're a bad firefighter, that you're a bad police officer. That's not what we're trying to say. What we're trying to say is how can you improve this, and where is it flagging some dysfunction in your cardiopulmonary health? Essentially, is what the purpose of the test is. So VO2 max is strongly correlated with mortality, cardiovascular disease, cancer, metabolic disease, and essentially it is also correlated with first responder performance. There's up and coming data and firefighter research that relative VO2 max is one of the primary predictors of fireground performance. So it's a very important, not just a health metric, but a fitness metric. So we try to articulate that to the first responder in a way that's like not insulting them or not saying like, hey, we're trying to take your job away or anything like that. It's more so just like, hey, how can we improve this? And how is this a comprehensive look at your personal health? And how can we essentially make you able to serve the population as long as possible so that you can reach retirement safely and then drain the retirement system afterwards and live as long as possible afterwards as well. So that's kind of where it applies. You could go more specifically if you wanted to into firefighters, because they oftentimes do bottle consumption tests or air consumption tests. And because we're looking at different ventilatory thresholds or metabolic thresholds during the CPET, we can really understand at a very deep level how efficient someone is with using their oxygen. So that is also another application, is that we can tell them, hey, like from 1 year to the next, you improved your anaerobic threshold or your ventilatory threshold by this many watts, or your VO2 was this much higher at that threshold. So that means you're more efficient on a bottle. You're not going to be breathing as heavy during an intense event or a fire, or if you just had a police chase, then your heart rate's going to come down much faster if you're more efficient. So that's kind of how we try to apply it.
Sure. Well, I imagine because of the two primary energy systems that these guys are using, both anaerobic and aerobic, right? They have to have a good mix of that, right? So kind of there's the term tactical athlete that's out there, right? And I imagine they fall into that category. So
absolutely.
So obviously as we dive into, and there's a lot of different research coming out, which is really cool. But yeah, how do they mix? Hey, you're sitting around the station, you get a call. Hey, now you're going anaerobic. Next thing you're on the fire ground, and it's an aerobic. I use the term sprint loosely, right? But a lot of it is, hey, managing a lot of demands at the same time. So yeah, how do you kind of cater, or do you help train them at all in that, or you just give them the information?
We give them the information. We do kind of coach them a little bit. So after the CPET, we give them their heart rate zones. We use a 5-zone model essentially, where zone 1 and zone 2 is fat utilization, your fat burning zones, and then zone 3 and 4 and 5 are more heavy on carbohydrate usage. So it's more intense. You're breathing heavier. You're less efficient. And everybody has those thresholds when they're exercising. So that's why we, from year to year, we try to see how those are changing, and we try to coach them in a way or give them advice. Essentially, we don't offer coaching programs or anything like
Mhm.
that, but we do give them advice on, hey, like your fat utilization is really poor. You could essentially increase your aerobic efficiency if you were to do more cardio in general. Or, hey, your tolerance for high intensity exercise is really poor. You should do more high intensity interval training at like zone 4, zone 5, these more intense heart rate zones. And then kind of telling them what that looks like, because there's obviously multiple modalities of exercise, and people have different preferences and different ways to stay consistent with their exercise program. So we're careful with that too. We kind of offer advice as far as like what we've seen. Like,
Mhm.
hey, a lot of people have had success with this modality, or, it's very common for firefighters to do this type of exercise.
Sure.
And we just try to also cater to their past. Like a lot of times, firefighters and police officers will say, "Oh yeah, like in the past, I used to run, or I used to, do bike races, or something like that, or I used to really love the road test." So we try to bring back that like from their past and say, "Hey, just get back to doing that because it's going to impact your health in a positive way."
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, that's great. And what I'd like to talk about impact a little bit more is, and again, if you feel comfortable offering it, but like, have you seen any changes in how the department engages with this information?
Oh yeah, that's there's a very predictable trend for a lot of departments, is that our first year coming in, they're a little bit hesitant, right?
Mhm.
They're apprehensive. They're like, who are these guys? Are they trying to take my job away? Are they trying to say I'm not fit for duty and I need to get off the truck, or something? And that's not what we're there for, right? So it's a pretty common trend that probably year 2 or year 3 is when they're much more comfortable with us, and they realize that we're just there to help. We're just
Mhm.
there to give them their health information, and we're there to help them improve. We're not trying to take their jobs away or say they're not good at their job. A lot of times, we catch a lot of things, and it impacts their health in a positive way. They get established with a primary care physician, or a cardiologist, or a pulmonologist, whatever they need, an endocrinologist, because it is such a comprehensive physical. It does tend to catch some things over time, and we can especially look at trends over time, which is the most valuable piece of it. So that's kind of where they start to get less and less apprehensive, especially as they see that trended data. Like, hey, last year you looked good, but this year it's a little different, because individual physiology is the most important thing to look at in medicine, is how someone's individual physiology changes from time point to time point, as opposed to just comparing it to a norm. That's the most effective way to do medicine. So,
Sure. No, that's great. Yeah, and doing medicine, advancing the science. So I'd like to kind of dive into that a little bit more. So you guys are, like you said, you found a niche of taking frontline mobile health to the departments. I know you mentioned you have a few like brick and mortar stations and everything, but how do you think the physiological testing in a mobile environment is better for these guys versus like a traditional lab based? I know you're using lab based equipment, which is great, gold standard, but how do you think testing in a mobile environment differs versus them coming into the lab?
well, the machines stay the same, right? So we always calibrate the machines and make sure that that is standardized and unchanging. So really, it's nothing but a benefit when we're mobile and at their home station, essentially, because they're not in an environment that they're unfamiliar with. And while there is still some stress and some anxiety for a lot of these people, it is more comfortable than them having to, get in a car or get on a truck and drive over here. Um, so I would say that overall it is, a benefit. But that's more so the case for also departments that are less familiar with us. Um, a lot of times, those brick and mortar locations where they come to us, they're very, very familiar with us, right? So it's been an established relationship, and so there's a lot less anxiety there for that reason. So yeah, I would say it's nothing but a benefit. Where it can cause some problems, sometimes we have some troubleshooting to do, like because it's mobile. Like sometimes we go a long way, we haul our equipment in a trailer, and so it's really kind of behooves us to have technicians that are not just skilled at the actual screening process and physiology, but also have some know-how about how to fix the machine if it's like kind of acting funny, or how to make sure the calibration is a good calibration and is going to offer that unchanging test that we promise.
Sure, absolutely. So no, it sounds like you found some real world applications that you can dive into, some best practices that are coming out, and some workflows. Maybe you can help shed a little bit. You mentioned just recently about having good techs. Is there maybe any lessons learned that you'd like to share?
Just from my personal
Yeah, as a
experience.
personal and professional experience, while, as you said, you found this niche of like going to stations and going to departments, like, this might be a new emerging trend, right? Where guys, especially in this environment, folks don't have necessarily the capability or ability to come to your lab or your office. So, maybe shed some light on that.
Sure. Yeah, I would say some lessons learned. Probably the number one thing that sticks out to me is hypertension is
Hmm.
rampant, high blood pressure, especially during exercise. A lot of people don't realize that blood pressure can be normal at rest. And then when you push yourself to max effort cardiovascular exercise, you actually have what's called exercise hypertension. So I would say when I first started at Frontline and when I first started as an exercise physiologist, I was a little bit less wise to that fact. But as I've done more and more physicals and more CPETs, I've noticed that blood pressure is it just hypertension is very common, especially among the first responder population.
Hmm.
And also kind of tying in with that is that uh, testosterone replacement therapy has really skyrocketed in the first responder population. And sometimes that can result in hypertension as well, uh, due to more viscous blood if they're not donating enough, or also just due to long-term changes. So if you are a first responder and you're on testosterone replacement therapy, make sure your primary care physician is managing it well. See them regularly and get your lab work done regularly. That's very important to make sure you're not developing hypertension over time, because while testosterone is needed, if you have low testosterone, your primary care physician may prescribe that. It's very important to monitor your exercise blood pressure, because you don't really know what's going on under the scenes, behind the curtains sometimes with that. So that's probably the number one lesson I would say. Another lesson is how vital it is to interpret the EKG really well.
Hmm.
A lot of people in my field who are exercise scientists, unless they majored in a like clinical exercise physiology uh, program at a university, they're a little bit less familiar with EKGs because we're not nurses, we're not telemetry technicians, we're not doctors. So we're just exercise physiologists. So I think that there's a big need in that niche. Universities should teach EKG more because it's a very high value skill. Um, and for that reason, we've also employed some paramedics to be
Oh, okay.
CPET technicians as well, not just exercise physiologists. In the past, we have done that. So EKG is really important. Understanding, how that's going to impact how blood pressure and EKG might be impacting the firefighter or police officer when they're actually on a call. Because if you're testing them in a controlled environment where it's like an air conditioned room, it's a very linear controlled test. How much is that going to differ from when they're actually in a stressful situation? Maybe it's really hot outside, maybe they just went from one call to the next. Like, how is that in there? Have all their equipment on as well? That's really important. Right. So we have to assess all of those things. And I would say the number one learning experience for me at Frontline has been applying physiology to the first responder population, and understanding that like you cannot just look at a baseline test and say like that's just how that person is. Like you have to also apply it to what they're doing on a daily basis, and that should highlight the concerns, if you have any, in their physiological testing.
Sure. Gotcha. Excellent. No, thank you for that. So one thing is, we're coming kind of end of the episode here. I want to kind of start looking ahead, right? And some innovation and future direction. So first I'd like to ask, where do you see mobile health moving in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, it's a little bit tough to say because we are growing really fast. So our focus is really right now just trying to provide our service uh, in a standardized fashion, the way we've been doing it right now. But we are big innovators as well. So, for example, we just reached a partnership with Vasana, which is an AI platform for healthcare, essentially. So I believe that AI will impact what we do a little bit more from the interpretation side of things and from a trend line analysis side of things. And I'm also working with some people on my team with AI innovations as well. So I know everybody always brings up AI when they're talking about innovation and future direction and stuff, but it is what it is, right? So it's a really powerful tool, and we are learning from it. As long as you learn from it correctly, it can be a very valuable ally and asset. So I would say that's the main area. There on the CPET side, there are some things potentially that we could add to the CPET if the footprint is not too deep, if you will. So we could potentially start to look at muscle oxygenation.
Sure.
If we apply, I don't want to go too down the rabbit hole because that stuff is not really standardized right now in CPET, but it could be in the future. There's been some research on it. And when I say muscle oxygenation, I just mean essentially how is the muscle utilizing the oxygen that the heart has delivered to it, right? And are there any discrepancies in how the muscle is using that oxygen? Are there any deficiencies there? Because, for example, for diabetic patients, they can have really poor muscle oxygen utilization. So there are some, I guess you could say there are some ways we could really start to squeeze water from stone or squeeze more out of CPET and trying to look at trends. Heart rate variability is another thing I've been thinking about as far as we could apply more software, kind of more software to the EKG, I guess you could say, and try to look at how their heart rate's varying over time and stuff. So there are a couple AI projects going on with CPET that are really exciting and will aim to essentially automate or better automate interpretation, because one of the problems with CPET is interpretation is very niche, right? So exercise physiology and stress testing is already a niche, but CPET is a niche within that niche. So a lot of times cardiologists can be a little less familiar with the CPET data that we give them. So it's going to be really useful in the future if AI makes it easier to interpret and also relay that information, because then you won't have to spend, many hours studying CPET yourself. Not necessarily, you'll always have those experts, right, that have the deep knowledge of interpretation, but it will advance care if a doctor can look at the CPET data and you have an AI interpretation along with it to tell the cardiologist, like, this is what this means, this is what this means. Because there's a lot of gas analysis data that we look at that is not necessarily taught in medical school. Certain programs will not teach it. So that's why it's useful, right? Because now a lot of times pulmonologists are a little more familiar with the gas analysis stuff, but because the cardiopulmonary exercise test, a lot of times we are sending them to a cardiologist for our findings. And it can be a little bit much. It's like word salad, the reports that we send sometimes. So one thing we're trying to innovate as well is like, how do we concisely write these reports so that cardiologists can appreciate it and not just repeat a stress test? Because that's been a problem we've faced, is that essentially the CPET is the best exercise stress test you can give. And if you send it to a cardiologist, sometimes they have just done another stress test. It's like that's redundant, right? We need to start giving more thorough recommendations based on the CPET, and it would help if it was a little bit more standardized and more commonplace to understand CPET data. So that's kind of some of the innovations that I would say the field is going.
Sure. No, I mean, there's no doubt that AI is here to stay, right? There's no way around it, and it does make us a little bit easier too. So that's awesome. And I guess using AI even because the firefighters also do what's called a CPAT test, correct?
Right.
So is there, and man, maybe this is one of your research arms or future initiatives, is there any way you might be able to link or figure out a way between what the CPET and their CPAT data looks like? Or maybe that's already being done.
Well, so yeah, I mean, I guess less so the agility test, but more so like air consumption tests. So we actually did a study with Texas Tech University looking at their air consumption and how that relates, like how good performers and bad performers compare to the VO2 max test. And and also like how their body composition plays into those results. And unsurprisingly, the people with better VO2 max values had better air consumption tests. And a lot of the air consumption tests, while not necessarily an agility test, it did have a lot of anaerobic tests associated with it. There was hose carry, ladder climb, like very high intensity with their gear on, very high intensity activities. And still the people with higher VO2 maxes performed better. So, essentially, CPAT is kind of a separate thing. Needs to be more research there as far as like how VO2 max affects that agility test. But from an air consumption side of things and from a job task side of things, what we do is pretty relevant, and VO2 max shows to be one of the strongest predictors of performance there. But like you said, like there is definitely more research needed. I just went to a scientific conference called Science to the Station in Colorado, and their main motto is more research is needed, because that is definitely true. In the first responder population, there's not enough research that's been done. And VO2 max testing and CPET being a niche, there's a lot of opportunities there in the future.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, I wish you the best of luck with your research in that. Any initiatives or arms that come up with, we'd love to hear about it. So I guess, last little point here before we land this plane is, if there's one, takeaway that you'd want our listeners to walk away with, or maybe some advice to give to other departments, whether it be fire, police, EMS, what advice would you give, or what takeaway would you provide?
Probably the number one thing is, if you're a leadership in a fire department or a police department, not only do you have to strongly recommend cardiovascular exercise to your people, but you should try to walk the walk as well, because that's where leadership shines the most, is when you are also fit and you are also paying attention to those details about your health, right? Because as we all know, first responder health is heavily impacted by their daily job duties. And so if you have leadership that shows that, hey, like it is possible to be super fit and super healthy despite all these things, then it'll just make you a better leader, and also it'll improve the health of your entire department whenever you have, because if you have leadership and they're sitting behind a desk all day and they haven't been exercising, then it's just another variable that is going to make it harder for your first responders to be consistent with their exercise. Another thing that I would say is, on shift, it's really tough to exercise because you're responding to calls at odd hours. You're barely getting any sleep sometimes. So that being the case, don't just exercise on shift. Try to find times during the week, at least 2-3 times on the other days, where you can get some cardiovascular exercise. A lot of people will just hit the weights. They'll go to the weight room, or they'll do a CrossFit style workout. And there's nothing wrong with that. You want to maintain your muscle mass and your anaerobic system as much as possible, obviously, but we're talking about the aerobic system too. That's what's most impactful for cardiovascular health. So you want to do things that are more relevant to that. So machine-based cardio, go on a run, a weighted vest walk, something that's going to keep your heart rate elevated for an extended period of time. Or if you're doing intervals, you can obviously have rest periods with much higher intensities for those work bouts. But the point is that you're stimulating your heart muscle, not your skeletal muscles and the other parts of your bodies, right? So I would say those are the most important takeaways.
Awesome. No, all really good points, and really appreciate you sharing that. So, Conner, as we start to wrap up, where can listeners learn more about Frontline Mobile Health, learn more about you, maybe can make connections? Where can listeners find that information?
Yeah, so as far as Frontline, we do have a website, at frontlinemobilehealth.com, and we also have an Instagram page. And you'll go ahead and link those social media accounts. And then if you want to reach me, the best way is LinkedIn. I'm not on other social medias very often, so my LinkedIn page is a great way to reach out to me or connect with me if you want to learn more about Frontline or just cardiopulmonary exercise testing or exercise physiology in general.
Sure. No, I'll make sure to put all those links in the show notes for you as well. So great. Well, Conner, thank you very much for joining us here on the Electra-Med Edge. We really appreciate it and all the insights you had to share. We're looking forward to seeing the growth of frontline mobile health over the next couple of years and hopefully get into some more departments across the country.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Andy, so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Thanks again for tuning into the Electra-Med Edge, where innovation meets precision in human performance and clinical care. To learn more about Electra-Med's full range of medical equipment and supplies, spanning neurology, cardiology, physical medicine and rehabilitation, sleep diagnostics, and respiratory care, visit us at electramed.com. Also, check us out on LinkedIn and Instagram at simply @Electra-Med. Be sure to follow, subscribe, and share this episode to stay on the cutting edge of healthcare technology. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one.